This is Classical Ideas with Greg Soden. Welcome to Classical Ideas. This is Greg Soden. Recently, I was perusing the library at school and found a graphic novel by author Samhita Arni of an ancient Indian epic known as the Ramayana. Except this version is called Sita's Ramayana. Many of you will be familiar with this story about Ram's wife Sita, the monkey god Hanuman, and the Rakshasa king Ravana. Ravana kidnaps Sita, and Ram raises an army to get her back. There are a few fantastic plot twists for first-time readers and lessons for return readers that make this one of the most memorable and fantastic stories ever written. The particular version of this Ramayana, written by Samhita Arni, is told from Sita's point of view. A very interesting feature of this book is that the text was written after the artwork was done, with Arni adding words to the scroll artwork done by Patua artist Moyna Chitrakar. When Arni was 8, she started writing and illustrating her first book, the Mahabharata, A Child's View, and which went on to be published in 7 language editions and sold 50,000 copies around the world. She received commendations from the German Academy for Youth Literature and Media and the Spanish Ministry of Culture. Her second book, Sita's Ramayana, a graphic novel developed in collaboration with Moyna Chitrakar, was on the New York Times bestseller list for graphic novels for 2 weeks in 2011. Her latest book, The Missing Queen, is a speculative fiction mythological thriller. Samhita is an alumnus of the United World College in Italy and has a double major in religion and film studies from Mount Holyoke College. She has lived in Indonesia, Pakistan, India, Thailand, Italy, and the United States. She spoke to me from India for this discussion. I had an absolute blast discussing my favorite Indian epic. Yes, the Ramayana is my favorite, with Samhita. She's on Twitter at Sam Arni, Samarni, so give her a follow. So without further delay, here's my conversation about Sita's Ramayana with Samhita Arni. I'm here today with Samhita Arni, author of Sita's Ramayana. Samhita, thank you so much for coming on Classical Ideas.
Thank you so much for having me here.
Can you spend a moment introducing yourself to the audience and maybe talking a little bit about the work that you do?
Sure. My name is Samhita Arni. I live in Bangalore. I am the author of 3 books, the Mahabharata-A, Child's View, which I also illustrated. My second book was Sita's Ramayana, a graphic novel that was illustrated by Patua artist Moyna Chitrakar. And my third book was The Missing Queen, which is a thriller based on the epic, the Ramayana. So my interest really lies in the area of mythology and how we interpret mythology, particularly today in contemporary India, and what kind of political implications that often carries for us today. I also teach. I teach creative writing at a college here in Bangalore. And I used to have a column on women in myth and history for an Indian paper for a year.
Excellent. I found your website, and on your website you have a link to all of the articles that you read, and I have to admit, I started going down the rabbit hole of your National Geographic articles.
Okay.
So in the future, we may have to do a little bit of discussion about your travel writing as well. So today I want to talk to you specifically about the Indian epic, the Ramayana, and the characters within it, specifically Sita and Rama. So when did you become aware of the story of Sita? What about her story hooked your attention as a writer and as a creative person?
The thing about the Ramayana is that we're sort of in India, we're all sort of brought up with it from God knows what age. So the earliest memory I have of the Ramayana is being retold a version of it and watching it on television. There was a very popular televised version of the Ramayana, but it didn't really interest me for the longest time. We have two major epics. The other epic is the Mahabharata. And that was the story that really interested me because it had far more fascinating female characters, and it seemed much more nuanced. The characters weren't so black and white as in the mainstream Ramayana. There were more shades of gray, and that intrigued me much more. So my first book had to do with the Mahabharata. But then as I grew older, the Ramayana became even more interesting for me than the Mahabharata because it's still a very important epic for us socially and even politically. There are metaphors from the Ramayana that are used constantly in our politics, in even court judgments. You'll see it in reality television shows. The idea of being like the characters Ram and Sita, they're held up to be exemplars, ideals we must mold ourselves into, people who we should base our behavior on. Sometimes that can be very problematic, particularly because the character of Sita, who is the wife who follows her husband into exile and is abandoned at the end of the Ramayana, this isn't necessarily a reality I would want any woman to live with. So for those reasons, I became interested in the Ramayana. And then what we tend to forget is that there are multiple versions of the Ramayana. And today I grew up being familiar with only one version of the Ramayana. So it came to me as a shock when I was about 22 when I came across this very famous essay by a scholar, A.K. Ramanujan, on the fact that there are multiple Ramayanas. He called it 300 Ramayanas, but he himself did not know how many Ramayanas we have. And each part of the country, each language in India has its own Ramayana. And then if you go outside of India, Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, countries that are not Hindu but are Buddhist and Muslim, they also have their own variants of the Ramayana. So, and there are differences in the Ramayana. And these are quite interesting. I also became very fascinated by the oral versions of the Ramayana, some of which are retold by women who come from dispossessed or disenfranchised communities, women who are oppressed. And their Ramayana, the versions that they sing, because these are oral traditions, these are sung by illiterate women, they offer a critique of the Ramayana, where we see Ram as an ideal king in the mainstream Ramayana, and Sita as his wife. These Ramayanas really question ideas of justice, ideas of what is right and wrong, ideas of what gender roles are. And so for that reason, I find when I came across these other different Ramayanas, it was almost like a shock to the system because it was the same story but told so differently.
Wow. And that's really interesting to me that you just said that Ram and Sita are held up as exemplars in society. And I would imagine that they're like referred to in like politics as well. Like in the United States, the Bible is the number one most frequently cited book in the U.S. Senate. And the stories of like the Good Samaritan and like Jericho Road, like all these like legendary Christian stories are held up as like exemplars in the West. And so that's really, really interesting that they're brought up so often in everyday life in India. So you really can't like get away from the stories of Ram and Sita, just like you can't get away from the stories of like Jericho Road or the Good Samaritan. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's very true. Our culture still uses myths to mold ideas of what good behavior, ideas of what roles are, ideas of what good and bad are. And I think that's what the use of mythology is often in different cultures.
So the author of the Ramayana is credited to be a sage named Valmiki, the author of the Ramayana. What is known about this sage?
So, when we talk about the author of the Ramayana being Valmiki, this is the textual tradition of the Ramayana. There is some suspicion that there might have been versions that predate this Ramayana, certainly possibly oral traditions, but other variants as well. So what we call this the Valmiki Ramayana, and Valmiki himself has written has made himself a character in the story. So he's quite fascinating. There are different mythologies that are attributed to him much later. He's a character in other myths as well. But then there's also this local legend which doesn't seem, which seems to hold him to be a robber who turned into a saint. So there is more myth than we know, than history that we know about him. But he himself is a character in the Ramayana. Much like in the Mahabharata, we have another sage, Vyasa, who also narrates the events of the Mahabharata, and he too is a character in his story. So both these epics employ frame kind of narratives where the narrator themselves is a character in the story, and this really helps break the frame. So that's one of the things that's very interesting about a lot of Indian epics, is that they employ the sort of frame device which breaks the relationship between the story being a fiction thing and makes it much more immediate.
Something that my students find really interesting whenever we read the Bhagavad Gita or the Ramayana is this difference between the Hindu scripture concepts of Smriti and Shruti. Is the Ramayana is Smriti scripture in Hinduism, correct?
I'm actually, I mean, to be honest, I'm not a scholar or any of that thing. I wouldn't know enough to answer that question.
That's totally fine.
Whether it is revealed or whether it is heard. Yeah. And I would also, we have a lot of discussion right now about whether the Ramayana is a sacred text. It is something that I see primarily as literature, or a sacred text, or a historical text, and it is something that I see as an amazing story first and foremost. And there are many authors of the Ramayana, not necessarily Valmiki, but we also have Tulsidas, we also have Kamban. All of them have put a different kind of flavor to the epic.
Excellent.
So the idea of originality or this being told in one particular way, being revealed in one, and to deviate from that is problematic for me. So when we introduce these ideas of Smriti and Shruti and say that it has come directly from a divine source, it may have. I don't want to question anyone's religious opinions there, but I like to celebrate the multiplicity of voices that the Ramayana tradition has. So I don't like to go into the deliberate or consider the questions of Smriti and Shruti.
Excellent. That's totally fine. So one of the things that really jumped out about your book when I saw it on the shelf at the store is that it's titled Sita's Ramayana. So it's told from the first-person point of view of Sita. What differences exist in your version, like compared to like a more Ram-centric version?
I beg your pardon? This version compared to a what-centric version?
Like a version that centers mostly on like Rama's first-person point of view.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, it is called the Ramayana. It is the story of Ram. But and when I'm talking about myself as I'm the creator of this. I'm not the sole creator of this book. Moyna Chitrakar, who is the artist that created the artwork for this, in some ways she is the primary storyteller, and she's the real primary author of this book, since the artwork preceded the text. And the she herself comes from the Patua tribe, and they have their own variant of the Ramayana, and it is an oral tradition which is produced on these large scrolls. They sing it, and they move from village to village, being oral storytellers, using the scroll and the songs to relate the Ramayana. But what's also really interesting about the Patua version is that it focuses so much on Sita, and it begins with Sita in the forest. There's some speculation that the Patua version may have originated or found its roots in an earlier version of the Ramayana, which is a 16th century version written by a poetess, Chandrabati, which was, in some places, she's quite fiercely feminist. If she was being published today, a lot of people would have a lot of problems with some of Chandrabati's pronouncements on Ram. She doesn't particularly seem to think of him as a very strong character. So the Patua tradition seems to come out of that, which is it is a critical tradition. It is a tradition which is more pro Sita and not so much from Ram's perspective, and is even quite critical of Ram and his actions.
Okay,
The
so sorry.
yeah, the Valmiki and say for the Tulsidas versions, for example, are a very Ram-centric story. They're also connected, politically in some ways with the ideas of empire and rule and the state, rule in society and the rule of law. These other versions, like the Patua version, like Chandrabati's versions, really critique that. So the Ramayana is not merely a story about a couple and a war and an estranged couple. It also becomes a vehicle for carrying much more complex ideas about society, social structure, law, gender roles. And there are some that have advocated, for a very a rule of law, and that is the kind of mainstream Ramayana. The more critical, the Patua version is implicit in its critique of those ideas by taking the side of Sita.
Okay, so Moyna Chitrakar's art was the first part of the story?
Yes.
Okay.
That came first, yeah.
I understand. So how did you work through like creating text around pre-existing art? Like what's that process like?
It's an interesting process. It's quite it's a kind of a I used to work in another comic book company called Chitrakar. And so there is always the writer who comes up first with the idea, and then they panel it out, and then it goes to an artist, and then the artwork's done, and that's how it goes. This was completely reversal of that. The artist had done most of the artwork, and then I came on board, and I tried to create text around these images and figure out how they would be placed on a page, and work with a designer on that. And there were certain places where, for example, the Patua version is also accompanied with song, so you'd sing through an episode. But for a graphic novel, you need to have a linear narrative, and you also need to fill in all those gaps that would be covered by song. So there were a lot of instances where we had to go back to Moyna and say, can you do some images to fill in this part? It's also, in an oral tradition, you can sort of switch from perspective to perspective. You don't have to be consistent all the time. So, for example, at times, you would break off into Hanuman's story, or you'd break off into another part of the Ramayana. But with this version, what we thought was really interesting was to preserve the immediacy of Sita's perspective and Sita's voice. So when we converted it into graphic novel, we really chose to make it very much more linear narrative in that respect. We also had to introduce a few characters because, for example, the most important part of the Ramayana, one of the most important parts of the Ramayana is the fact that there's this war that Ram has to come to Lanka to rescue Sita. But because Sita is imprisoned in Lanka, she never sees the war. So how do we show the war through Sita's eyes? And so for that part, I had to go and borrow a character from another Ramayana, the Tamil Ramayana, Kamban Ramayana. And this is a character called Sujata. I believe she also exists in the Tulsidas Ramayana. But so we borrowed this character because she has the gift of prophecy as well as the gift of being able to see many things at once. So she was able to relate to Sita what happens on the battlefield. That's the role that she has in the Kamban Ramayana.
So I heard that Moyna Chitrakar, she doesn't read or write. She's a part of this Patua culture. Can you tell me a little bit about your collaborative process with her? Did you was all of your interaction with her like in person?
No, actually, a lot of it wasn't. So it's kind of bizarre that we managed to pull the book together. But she had done all the artwork, and then I was sitting in my publisher's office in Chennai, and this sheet, because the Patuas paint on scrolls, they had asked her to do it on sort of A4 size sheets. So then the artwork would come in, and there would be like captions written in the back about what this piece was supposed to be about. And we, there was a lot of back and forth where they had to call Moyna and say, what is this picture about? And what is that? And sort of string it together that way. And then eventually at the end of the process, after it was all done and we launched the book in Chennai, that was the first time I met Moyna.
Oh, wow. So,
Yeah.
Okay, so did you get to see any of these original Patua scroll paintings?
Yes. They're
how big
giant.
are they?
It's like, I think 17 feet long, some of them are. They're really long.
Okay, wait, so is one painting that big, or is it like the whole entire story on one giant long 17-foot long scroll?
I think they have various episodes on different 17-foot long scrolls. But it's also it's a format that really lends itself for a graphic novel because there's sections of it with each there are different panels in the scrolls.
Very cool. Okay, so as you know, when I was telling you earlier, I teach religious studies in a high school in the United States, and I teach these stories that you've been talking about, the Mahabharata, the Bhagavad Gita, the Ramayana. What would you say if you came to my classroom to talk to my students, like in person? What would you say to my young American high school students about why they should care about and read Indian epics in their liberal arts education? Like, what do these stories offer everybody in the world?
I think what would you say if you had to come to my class here in India and had to tell my students why they had to read American classics?
That's such a good question. Okay, so let me try. I'll answer. So in order to, understand a place, it is essential, I think, to have a decent grounding in that place's literature and artwork, and also because if you never expose yourself to new ideas and new cultures and new texts and artwork, your universe remains small. And to me, the purpose of life is to continually and purposely expand my view of the universe. So if I were talking to your class in India, I think that I would say that reading works from other places will only make their lives richer, fuller, and will expand their view of the universe, which will then extend compassion and empathy to all human beings around the world, not just the people that you can see with your own eyes on a day-to-day basis in your town.
Well, I'm so glad that I asked you to do that because I agree with all of that. But but to be honest, my answer is a little different. I think that's an answer that's wonderful, and that's a great answer.
Great,
and I agree with all of it. But to me also these epics point to what is human in all of us. I think that these stories, particularly the something like the Mahabharata, where you have or the Ramayana, where you have war and you have people fighting for concepts like honor and the futility of war sometimes, the consequences of war, what pushes us, desire, aggression, anger, these emotions, these seem to be universal in a certain respect. And I think sometimes these stories also offer us a way to explore our own selves, our own internal universe, to enable us to understand what if our anger is unchecked, what it may lead to, for example, or what happens if there's frustration is internalized within a character. So sometimes I think also these stories are great in teaching us how to understand ourselves and our own internal emotional universes. But I also believe, very much that the Mahabharata is still a story that we can see, for example, playing out even today. The story of conflict between nations that are like brothers, and the kind of catastrophe it can cause. Even in recent history, we have seen that play out time and time again. So I think this story is still relevant, regardless of whether it was written thousands of years ago. It's still happening today. War still happens, and the consequences of conflict haven't changed.
I completely, I love that. So I have a couple lines in the book that I want to ask you about that I think segues really well from what you just said. So I was reading, and on page 91 of the book, you said, "What is this war, pitting brother against brother, which kills sons while fathers live?" And this reminds me of a scene in the Bhagavad Gita where Arjuna is struggling to muster up the strength to kill men whose ambitions are still desires in their life. He's about to kill people that have a long life ahead of them. Do you see this ability to consider the not yet lived futures of people as an ethical dilemma to pursuing war? Is this like a consistent theme in Indian literature?
Um, I'm not sure that I'm I know enough about the expanse of Indian literature to answer that, or I can consider that right now to be able to give you uh, saying that encapsulates all of that. But I think yes, definitely considering the consequences of one's actions is a very important aspect of dharma or the idea of dharma. Um, and in the Valmiki Ramayana, which was translated by and the version of the Valmiki Ramayana that I'm most familiar with is has been translated by someone I regard as a teacher, Arsha Sitar. And she there's a part of it where um, Ram and Lakshman and Sita have come into the forest and they're wearing the garb of ascetics, but they're also carrying weapons. And if you're, familiar with the concept of dharma, ascetics have a kind of dharma, warriors have a different kind of dharma. Dharma or the purpose of ascetics is to pray. Warriors fight. Now, Ram, by being in exile, by accepting the garb of an ascetic, is in contradiction of his dharma that he was born into. But he doesn't leave this old dharma behind. He carries his weapons, the mark of his, being a warrior with him, even though he has accepted the dharma of being an ascetic for the period of his exile. And Sita points out this, and there's a description in the Valmiki Ramayana where they move into this hermitage and they have their weapons, these bright shining weapons on the wall. And Sita points out this discrepancy. She says, dharma is shukushma, it is subtle, it is intangible, it's a very complex thing. If you bring weapons, what she goes on to say is if you have brought weapons of war with you, war will follow you. And that is what happens in the Ramayana, so to speak. They have brought weapons into the forest. They go hunting, and hunting is not what ascetics do. It is what warriors do. And they invite war upon themselves. So I think, actually now I've lost track of what your initial question was.
It's totally fine. So like this war that we seem to get ourselves into throughout all of human history. There's like untold numbers of people have met death in these wars that we have invited upon ourselves. And on page 113, you have a line that says that this is for one man's unlawful desire. Like, I know that you said earlier that the Ramayana is relevant today, and the line for one man's unlawful desire really jumps out at me. Are there any events in the world, like today, that remind you of the unlawful desire of one man, like in the Ramayana?
I feel I could get into hot soup for answering that. But there is one man's unlawful desire. I feel like there are many examples of this. Well, I think if you consider colonial conquest as unlawful desire, yes.
Sure.
People try to seize what there is, and that has left us with generations of issues. I think every, conquest or war on some level begins with unlawful desire, a desire to own or possess or hurt. And that is unlawful to me.
And so Ram doesn't really fight for Sita's freedom in this book. He's really fighting for himself. Like, does Rama's selfish fighting teach you anything in like 2018? Because he's not really fighting for her; he's fighting for himself. It seems like.
Yeah, for his honor or for his sense of self. Yeah.
So why does honor? First question then, like honor plays a huge role in this story. Why is honor crucial to understanding some of these plot twists?
Well, honor is also very much connected to this idea of dharma, I think. And you have a certain purpose or role that you have to play, and because also Ram's honor, and this is a very gender's thing, is lies also in Sita's chastity, and Sita being his wife. This is a very Indian concept that a woman's honor, a woman's chastity, all of that reflects on the honor of her family, and specifically on the honor of either her father or husband. So we have in India many honor killings. When, for example, girls elope or choose to marry somebody outside of their community or caste, you have they are often killed for it. So this idea of honor is very much tied into the idea of marriage, into the idea of family, and also in terms of also if you choose to marry outside the bounds of your caste or your community or religion, that's also tied into this concept of honor, which is very problematic.
You also say in the book that I really enjoyed, there's a line on 120 that says, "War is merciful to men." Can you elaborate on that for me? Because I found that line to be really fascinating.
Well, I think it goes something like war is merciful to men because, they're either heroes or they just die through it. But it's the women who have to survive defeat, that they're the ones who, wars are fought primarily by men. And it's the women who are left. If you are the wife of someone who has been the loser in the war, then you are likely to be raped. You are likely to be seized as another man's property. It has really played out fairly for women. So I wanted to bring in that perspective. And a lot of wars have been fought over women, right? Helen of Troy, most remarkably.
Yeah.
So, I mean, on some level, on most brutal level, wars about property, and women are seen sometimes as part of that, as the property or the booty or whatever that it is to be claimed. And they don't die, but they have to suffer being traded. And there's the episode of the story of Tara that sort of reflects that. Tara is the wife of, at one point, one brother, and then the other brother, both who are kings of the same kingdom at different times, of kings of the Vanars, the monkey kingdom. And at one point, she's married to one brother, and one point, she's married to another brother, and it becomes very confusing, whose wife she actually is. And she seems to have no option but to accept that. There is no point where you can say, no, look, I don't want to be anyone's wife, or I don't want to be put through this, or I choose to be single or not marry anybody. There is no option there.
What's so interesting about everything you just said is, like, in the book, Rama succumbs to all these public whispers and rumors to send Sita away, even after she had passed a trial by fire. Why do you think that Rama would succumb to this? Does this honor come back into it? Because it seems like women are, endlessly the victim of either war and being passed around, as you just mentioned. So why does it seem like Rama is, succumbing to these rumors, even though she obviously is not guilty of anything?
I mean, it is this idea that Ram has fought all this war, and then he sees Sita, and he doesn't know if she. How could she have not been touched or been raped by Ravana? And I think it's a struggle for him to understand that Ravana did not touch or rape Sita, and that at some point Sita says, you do not come closer to me than this blade of grass. And Ravana seems to accept that boundary. So there's some strange honor to Ravana as well. We can't quite comprehend it. And I think that's difficult for Ram to understand. But it's also, again, this idea that, women have to constantly prove themselves, and their worth or their sense of self and their sense of value is tied in so much to their chastity. Sita does not only have to prove herself by the test by fire, and that too in front of an entire battlefield, and, walk through fire to prove that she is pure. And this idea of purity is also very problematic. But then the next thing that happens is she returns to Ayodhya, and even there, people are questioning her chastity because they have not been there to see her chastity on the battlefield be proved. And it's not enough to Ram that she has been proven to be chaste. He feels that to be a good king, he must respect or listen to what his people are saying and follow that. And so he chooses to send Sita away when she is heavily pregnant, and abandon her in a forest, which I don't think that's the best way to deal with a situation.
Yeah.
That kind of part of the Ramayana really, stucks in my maw. It's something that I still grapple with.
Yeah, it seems like she's held up to an impossible standard.
Yeah, and so And at the end of the Ramayana, when Ram and Sita meet again, because Ram has, and there are these two children, Love and Kush, that Sita has given birth to. And at that point, Ram seeing Sita again, says, come back to Ayodhya and be the queen there. And Sita says, but prove your chastity again. This is something he asks for. And she says, I prove myself by if I have been, honorable or whatever, if I am untouched, whatever, if I'm pure, then let the earth open up and claim me. And so that's what happens. She doesn't choose to go back with Ram. She chooses to go back into her earth, the mother, and that is her vindication. That's a really interesting end to that story.
Do you have a favorite character in the book besides Sita?
I very much like the character of Tridata, the Rakshasi, the Rakshasi princess of Lanka, who is Sita's jailer and also her companion and her friend and her confidant in Lanka. And she has the power of prophecy, so she's able to see that Ram will come and he will rescue Sita, and there will be this great war fought. And that consoles Sita, that her husband will come for her and rescue her. But at the same time, Trijata also sees the destruction of her people. And even though she knows what side's going to win, she chooses to remain with the losing side. And I think that's for me, that's a really interesting character. That's a really interesting perspective.
What is just for the benefit of the listeners, what is a Rakshasa? Because I could see a lot of people not understanding what that is.
So it's sort of a demon, and the people of Lanka who Ram goes to fight, who are led by Ravana, the king who has abducted Sita. They are considered Rakshasas and Rakshasis, demons who live in Lanka.
And so you did work on a thriller book based on the Ramayana. What was that called again?
The Missing Queen.
Okay, so what is the context of the thriller that you worked on? Is it a full-length novel?
Yes, it is a full-length novel. Yeah.
Okay, so does it take place in contemporary society, or does it take place long ago? What's the novel about?
It sort of imagines that the Ramayana has happened in India, in contemporary India, but India is Ayodhya, and Sita is no longer in Ayodhya, and so there's a journalist who is curious to find out what Sita's side of the story is, and starts asking all the wrong questions, and finds that as she pulls the story, she gets led to murkier and murkier and accounts that really question her understanding of what happened in this great war. And so she meets Angad, who's this prince of the Vanars, and she's told her multiple versions of the story, different versions of the story. She meets Surpanaka. She goes to Lanka to meet Surpanaka, who is a Rakshasi princess, and in this version, Surpanaka is the leader of sort of a terrorist party that's fighting for freedom of Lanka. And so she tells her a different version of the story that really changes the narrative. And but most of all, this journalist is curious to find Sita's version. If this war has been victorious, if Ram has returned to Ayodhya victorious, why isn't his wife there? So for me, I think the Ramayana, since it's still, one of the terms in India, and that's often used in Indian politics today, is Ram Rajya, the rule of Ram. And it's sort of this ideal golden age that is looked up to, because that was when things were functioning properly. That was when law was had. That was a great and glorious time. That was a golden age. And so that is evoked in politics, in elections. And I find it really problematic because there are all these people who are excluded from that. Sita is excluded. She cannot be part of this Ram Rajya. She is banished from it. There's another story of a Shudra who's coming from the lowest caste, Shambuka, who aspires to be an ascetic, which is the highest caste. And he starts to pray, but because this disrupts the order and the balance of society, so he must be killed. And so all of these stories really disturb, you have to stick to your caste and to your caste dharma in Ram Raja. That is the only way that law functions. It's almost totalitarian. Everyone has to stick to the positions they are in. If they deviate from that, then, or if they critique that, then there is no space for them. And I think in some ways, in contemporary India, we run the risk or the danger of that. If we evoke that idea of Ram Raja, then we live in a caste-based society. We live in a society that excludes minorities, that excludes women.
You know, you're not alone there. Around the world right now, it seems like too many places are saying, back then when we were so great. And so that's a trend that I think that a lot of places in the world right now are grappling with, including where I live in the United States. So that's a little point of comparison that I would like to point out. Do you have any other projects in the works right now related to like Indian mythology or epic literature?
I have a work of historical fiction which is based on the Sangam Era in South India. Again, in India, it's very interesting, but what we know of history is really dominated by the colonial period and by also what happened in North India, where I come from South India, but we ourselves in South India are not so familiar with our own histories. And the Sangam Era is a very interesting period. It's called the Sangam Era because it was a period of a literary renaissance. And I've become very fascinated by the figure of one of the writers of the Sangam Era, who was a prince who renounced his claim to the throne and became an ascetic, and then penned an erotic epic that featured two women in primary roles. So I became very interested by this character, and my next book has to do with him and his story.
Excellent. Sam Arni, where can people find you online if they want to know more about your work?
They can come to my website. It's samarni.com. And you can, there's a bio and stuff about me there. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for taking this time this evening to talk to me about the Ramayana and Sita. And thank you so much for coming on Classical Ideas.
Thank you so much, Greg. It's been a pleasure to be in here.
Classical Ideas is produced by me, Greg Soden. Music on Classical Ideas is performed and composed by Derek Striving. You can find his music at www.wearewarmmusic.com. If you would like to support this show, please subscribe or leaving a rating in iTunes, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, or anywhere you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening.